What happens when a flight attendant slaps the woman she thinks doesn't belong, only to discover she owns the jet? In her job, the moment Danielle Covington stepped onto the sun-warmed tarmac of Santa Monica's private airstrip, a vivid blend of jet fuel and ocean salt filled her lungs. The sea breeze, brisk and cool, tugged at the edges of her tailored blue blazer as dawn stretched golden fingers across the sleeping city. Before her stood the magnificent Gulfstream G700, its metallic frame gleaming with almost blinding brilliance beneath the morning light. It looked like a vision pulled from a dream, but this wasn't fantasy. It was her aircraft, her pride, her personal testament to perseverance. And yet, by just looking at her, no one would ever assume it belonged to her. Danielle ascended the jet's narrow steps, each measured step of her low heels echoing softly, confidently. Inside, the cabin sat still, unoccupied and untouched. The rich leather seating and deep mahogany trim exuded a quiet opulence, waiting for the world to stir. She placed her carry-on beside her favorite seat, second row, right-hand side, then gently draped her blazer across it, a motion she had done countless times. This was meant to be a simple journey to Dallas, a board meeting, a quick round table, and then a smooth flight back to Los Angeles. She had arrived early, as always. She cherished the moments before the storm of business swept in, the peace before the gears began to grind. But that serenity shattered in an instant. A voice, sharp as broken glass, pierced the air behind her. "Excuse me, who are you, and what are you doing here?" Danielle turned slowly and with composed grace. Striding toward her was a woman, mid-30s, fair-skinned, with her platinum blonde hair pulled tight like a noose. Her eyes radiated distrust. Her arms crossed rigidly over her chest, and her stance carried the posture of someone prepared for confrontation. "I'm supposed to be here," Danielle said with calm dignity, offering a polite, measured smile. But the flight attendant's demeanor did not thaw. If anything, it hardened. "And who exactly gave you permission to board this aircraft?" Danielle blinked. Was this really happening? "I own the plane," she replied, her tone unflinching. The woman's laughter sliced through the silence, a short barking sound dripping with disbelief. "Yeah, sure you do," she sneered. "Ma'am, I need you to exit this aircraft immediately." Danielle stood still, unshaken, silently contemplating whether this was some elaborate prank. But the steel in the woman's eyes said otherwise. This was no joke, no misunderstanding. It was raw, unfiltered prejudice. "I'm Danielle Covington," she said firmly. "I own Covington Aviation. This is my jet." A heavy silence fell between them, thick with disbelief. But the woman didn't budge. If anything, she seemed more convinced of her own story than the truth unfolding in front of her. "You need to leave," she repeated louder this time, her voice cutting through the stillness like a cleaver. Danielle felt a flash of fire spark deep in her chest, but she quelled it. She refused to let rage dictate her next move. She wasn't here to match this woman's hostility. She stood in power, not in pride. Before she could utter another word, the flight attendant lunged forward and gripped her arm. Danielle recoiled, her movements swift and deliberate. "Let go of me," she said, voice low and cold like a steel blade. But Melinda, the flight attendant, leaned closer, her face twisted with contempt. "You think you can just waltz onto private property and con your way into a free ride?" she hissed. "Not today." Danielle drew herself up, standing tall, shoulders back, eyes steady. "I'm not running a con," she said with unwavering calm. "I'm the reason this jet exists. You have no idea who you're speaking to." Outside, one of the nearby engines roared to life, a distant, thunderous growl. But inside, everything shrank down to the two women, locked in a quiet, blistering battle of perception versus truth. Danielle hoped reason might finally surface. But then Melinda's eyes drifted down her outfit. Jeans, simple shoes, the unassuming blazer resting over the seat. No pearls, no designer labels, no gold watches. Just quiet confidence in a world that demanded flash. In that moment, Danielle saw it. The exact second Melinda decided she didn't look like she belonged. "I think you should go get the captain." She didn't finish. Melinda, eyes blazing with rage and arrogance, raised her hand and slapped her. The sound ricocheted through the cabin. Sharp, violent, cruel. Danielle didn't stumble. She didn't flinch. She didn't even raise her voice. She stood still, breath shallow, as her fingers slowly reached for her cheek. Her eyes never left Melinda's, brown, unwavering, filled with a quiet, searing power. For the first time, Melinda looked afraid. Passengers had begun to board. Conversation halted. A man at the door dropped his coffee, its contents bleeding across the carpet. A woman gasped and shielded her child instinctively. Everyone stared, but not at Danielle. They looked at Melinda with revulsion, with disbelief. Danielle let the silence stretch, wrapping it tightly around the moment like a noose. Her face still burned, but she didn't touch the redness again. She wouldn't give Melinda the satisfaction. Instead, she calmly picked up her blazer, brushed off an invisible speck of lint, and began to slide it on with slow, deliberate precision. Melinda fumbled for her radio, her hands trembling. "I'm calling security," she stammered. "You're trespassing." Danielle straightened the cuffs of her blazer, then lifted her gaze once more. "Please," she said softly. "By all means, call them." Passengers hovered uncertainly. Some began stepping back. Others whispered frantically. The air felt charged, ready to explode. And then from the cockpit emerged Captain Roland Gates. Tall, composed, his graying temples a testament to years of loyalty and excellence. His eyes found Danielle instantly. "Miss Covington," he said, his voice loud, clear, and firm. "Is everything all right?" Melinda spun toward him, stunned. "Miss Covington?" she repeated, the name a foreign shape in her mouth. "She's Miss Covington." Danielle didn't even look at her. Her gaze remained with the captain. "Captain," she said with dignified poise, "it appears we have a very serious misunderstanding." The captain strode forward, the tension radiating from his body like heat from a flame. "My sincerest apologies, ma'am," he said, eyes narrowing at Melinda. "We'll take care of this immediately." Color drained from Melinda's face. Her confidence dissolved. She looked around helplessly, as if hoping reality might offer her an escape hatch. You can't be serious," she whispered. "She said she owns the jet." Danielle finally turned to face her expression unreadable, but her voice polished to perfection. "I don't just own the jet," she said, each word like a gavel striking down. "I own Covington Aviation Group. This flight, this crew, this company, and your job." The weight of her words settled over the cabin like thunder. Melinda stared, mute and paralyzed. Her radio dangled from limp fingers. Around her, whispers swelled. One man shook his head in disgust. Another began filming. Humiliation was just the beginning. What came next? That was justice. Whatever emotional storm loomed on the horizon, Captain Gates stepped forward, lowering his voice to a tone meant only for Danielle and Melinda. "You owe her an apology," he said with quiet firmness. "No room for debate. Right now." Melinda's eyes flickered between the captain and Danielle, rage and disbelief warring behind her expression. An apology? After what just happened? After striking a woman who had every right to be here? Who, as it turned out, owned the very air she breathed on this aircraft? For a fleeting second, it seemed like Melinda might resist. Her body went taut, her jaw locked so tightly it seemed on the verge of fracturing. But then, something shifted. The indignation drained from her frame like a tide receding from the shore. Her shoulders slumped, her face burned a deep scarlet. She looked hollowed out. I... I'm sorry, she stammered. The words barely registered. They lacked substance, carried no remorse, just syllables expelled under pressure. Danielle didn't respond right away. She didn't nod or wave it off. She just looked at Melinda, her face unreadable, her energy still and unmoved. Danielle wasn't interested in rehearsed civility. She didn't want an act for the other passengers. She wanted Melinda to feel the weight of what she'd done, to understand that her behavior wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment. It revealed a rot, something deeper and far more dangerous. Without speaking, Danielle reached into the interior pocket of her tailored blue blazer. Her fingers found a small, weighty business card. She drew it out and placed it on the nearest tray table between them, like a challenge, like a verdict. The card was exquisite, black with gold foil edging, minimalist yet commanding. Its inscription was clean, uncompromising: Danielle Covington, CEO and founder, Covington Aviation Group. Melinda stared at it as if it had burst into flames. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She stumbled back a step, colliding with a seat and gripping the headrest to keep herself upright. Captain Gates turned his attention to Danielle, his posture respectful. "Would you like her removed from the flight, Miss Covington?" Danielle didn't answer right away. Her eyes moved across the cabin, taking in the other passengers, their eyes wide, their expressions frozen. The crew huddled nervously near the cockpit door. Finally, her gaze returned to Melinda, who now looked impossibly small, like a scolded child waiting for punishment. Danielle had the power to dismantle Melinda's career in seconds. She could have eviscerated it. Her in front of everyone, pressed charges, seen to it that she never set foot on another aircraft. But Danielle didn't come to destroy. She came to educate. "No," she said at last. Her voice sliced through the silence like a razor. "She stays." There was a collective, breathless exhale. No one had realized how tightly they'd been wound until that moment. Melinda looked up, startled, almost grateful, but her reprieve was short-lived. "You're going to serve me," Danielle continued, her tone composed but unyielding, "with the dignity and attention you should have shown from the start. Let's find out if there's something you can learn today." And if Melinda thought the worst had passed, she was gravely mistaken. The lesson had only just begun. The plane's engines began their subtle whine as the aircraft prepared to taxi. The silence inside the cabin remained heavy, the air charged. Melinda nodded stiffly, her throat moving as she swallowed hard. Her hands were clenched so tightly they had turned bone white. She stepped back slowly, tugging at the lapels of her uniform as if trying to reassemble herself, to gather the fractured pieces of a dignity she had so carelessly discarded. Danielle settled back into her seat with quiet elegance. She crossed one leg over the other and turned to the window, unbothered by the burning stares that still clung to her. She had all the time in the world. It became the longest, most uncomfortable boarding process anyone on that plane could recall. Each passenger who entered glanced at Melinda, some whispering behind their hands, some shaking their heads in disbelief, a few mouthing, "That's her," while motioning discreetly toward Danielle. Melinda moved stiffly through the aisles like a marionette with tangled strings. Her smile was a rigid mask. She offered beverages in a voice that barely rose above a whisper. Each time her eyes brushed past Danielle's silhouette, she was reminded, not by words but by presence alone, of the mistake she had made. She had underestimated a woman who carried more command in her silence than most did in their shouting. As the aircraft soared above the golden California coastline, Danielle reclined in her seat and closed her eyes. She didn't need to speak. The lesson was unfolding with every breath, every minute of awkward silence. Her in front of everyone, pressed charges, seen to it that she never set foot on another aircraft. But Danielle didn't come to destroy. She came to educate. "No," she said at last. Her voice sliced through the silence like a razor. "She stays." There was a collective, breathless exhale. No one had realized how tightly they'd been wound until that moment. Melinda looked up, startled, almost grateful, but her reprieve was short-lived. "You're going to serve me," Danielle continued, her tone composed but unyielding, "with the dignity and attention you should have shown from the start. Let's find out if there's something you can learn today." And if Melinda thought the worst had passed, she was gravely mistaken. The lesson had only just begun. The plane's engines began their subtle whine as the aircraft prepared to taxi. The silence inside the cabin remained heavy, the air charged. Melinda nodded stiffly, her throat moving as she swallowed hard. Her hands were clenched so tightly they had turned bone white. She stepped back slowly, tugging at the lapels of her uniform as if trying to reassemble herself, to gather the fractured pieces of a dignity she had so carelessly discarded. Danielle settled back into her seat with quiet elegance. She crossed one leg over the other and turned to the window, unbothered by the burning stares that still clung to her. She had all the time in the world. It became the longest, most uncomfortable boarding process anyone on that plane could recall. Each passenger who entered glanced at Melinda, some whispering behind their hands, some shaking their heads in disbelief, a few mouthing, "That's her," while motioning discreetly toward Danielle. Melinda moved stiffly through the aisles like a marionette with tangled strings. Her smile was a rigid mask. She offered beverages in a voice that barely rose above a whisper. Each time her eyes brushed past Danielle's silhouette, she was reminded, not by words but by presence alone, of the mistake she had made. She had underestimated a woman who carried more command in her silence than most did in their shouting. As the aircraft soared above the golden California coastline, Danielle reclined in her seat and closed her eyes. She didn't need to speak. The lesson was unfolding with every breath, every minute of awkward silence. 2 hours into the flight, Melinda returned, her nerves nearly visible in the way her fingers smoothed the hem of her jacket. "Would you care for a beverage, ma'am?" she asked, her voice trembling. Danielle's eyes opened slowly. "Water," she replied. "Room temperature. No ice." "Of course," Melinda nodded, scurrying off like her very livelihood depended on it. Or for mercy, for a second chance. Anything. Danielle didn't indulge her. "People will forget what you said," she said softly, her tone almost tender. "They'll forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel." Melinda's lips trembled. Her eyes glistened. "You made me feel invisible," Danielle continued, stepping closer. "As if I didn't belong in a place I built from the ground up. As if I had to prove I deserved to sit here." The man in the suit remained silent, giving Danielle the floor. "And that," she concluded, her voice like velvet over steel, "will cost you more than this job." Melinda's knees gave slightly. She reached for the door frame to steady herself. Danielle didn't raise her voice. She didn't lash out. She didn't need to. She simply turned, descended the jet stairs, and stepped into the blazing sunlight, the future wide open before her. Inside the terminal, a few passengers paused as she passed. Some offered subtle nods. Others murmured her name, not with scandal but with admiration. Danielle adjusted her sunglasses, hoisted her carry-on, and kept walking. Each click of her heel against the polished floor echoed like punctuation at the end of a declaration. But the most powerful moment of the journey hadn't taken place at cruising altitude. It lingered here, in the silent understanding left behind. Outside, her driver stood waiting beside a sleek black town car, a tall woman in a sharp navy suit, her hair tightly coiled. Danielle handed over her bag and slid into the back seat with a grace only power can afford. As they pulled away from the terminal, Danielle leaned against the cool glass window, watching the airfield recede behind them. Her cheek still faintly throbbed where the slap had landed. But it wasn't the sting that stayed with her. It was the lesson. How swiftly people judge worth by the shallowest of metrics: skin tone, attire, assumed roles, without ever hearing your story. And how sometimes the fiercest rebuttal required no explosion of rage, only the quiet certainty of knowing who you are. In the rearview mirror, her driver glanced back. "You all right, ma'am?" Danielle smiled faintly. "I'm all right," she said. "Some lessons just carry a steeper price." They drove on through the pulse of Dallas, past mirrored skyscrapers, mom-and-pop diners, laborers in reflective vests, artists on street corners. 1,000 stories unfolding at once, many of them carrying the same weight of being misunderstood. Danielle knew this flight wasn't the end. There would be other planes, other rooms, other moments where someone would need to remind the world that presence is power. But today she had drawn a line, not with volume, but with presence. And as the car disappeared into traffic, the words she carried inside her remained firm, unshaken. Never shrink yourself to fit someone's narrow view. Make them adjust. Make them see you. Because real power doesn't need to scream. It echoes loudest in your silence.